Is it fair to call you an Indophile?
Very much so.
In 2013, when you came to Bengal, there's a road called Kamak Street in Kolkata. You got down from the car and had vada from a street side vendor.
That's right. I wanted to experience the Indian street food, and so I think it was called Victoria Vada. Apparently the 30 rupees I spent, they've kept that money as a souvenir.
Yeah. So you took out 30 rupees and gave it to him.
I did, that's right.
Hi, Dave. Welcome to Duologue.
Great to be with you. Thank you for having me.
David, for most of the people, you'll be known to be moderate and charismatic. And for some other, you will always be remembered for your Brexit incidents, the loss in referendum. Who is the real David Cameron?
Well, that's for other people to decide. But what I would say is I came along after the Conservative Party had lost 3 elections in a row. I modernized the party. I put it back in touch with people. I managed to get new candidates, new energy, addressed issues like climate change, and managed to win the election in 2010 and then again in 2015. And our government, I think, did a lot of very good things for our country. And the legacy of those, particularly on things like climate, on getting the deficit down, getting the economy growing, promoting tech, all those things are still there. Obviously, the Brexit decision was a very important decision. We were trying to deal with an issue that I think had to be confronted. I obviously regret the result of it. I wish my side of the referendum had won.
If you want to get Britain out of ever closer union, if you want fairness between those in the euro and those out of the euro, and you want a more competitive and successful Europe, let's fight this together.
I made a promise of holding a referendum. We kept that promise, and the British people gave the answer that they wanted, and that's been delivered.
Yes, we would discuss about Brexit, obviously, a little later. But what we wanted to start off with, to know about what you think of yourself. Who's David Cameron? I mean, obviously, we know how we get reflected by outside people, the audience, etc. But who do you think you are?
Well, I always describe myself as a modern, compassionate conservative. Modern because conservatives shouldn't be just about conserving what we have. We have to be looking forward, addressing modern challenges. Compassionate because my political philosophy is about helping everyone, particularly those who are left behind, who don't have the best life chances. But conservative because I think there are great things about our countries, whether we're in India or in the United Kingdom, that we should, institutions and things that we should want to promote and to keep. And using conservative methods, choice, competition, openness, these are things. So that's the sort of conservative I am, and I remain. Obviously, it's been more challenging, I think, in the Donald Trump populist world that we live in to hold by those values and that political approach, but I think it's more necessary than ever.
You are an Indophile. That's what we would like to think.
Very much so. I mean, when I became leader of the Conservative Party back in 2005, the first big country outside Europe I visited was India as leader of the opposition. And when I became Prime Minister in 2010, the first big country I visited outside Europe was again India. I came back and back and back because I'm a big believer in this partnership.
Absolutely. And India, as we say, it's not one country. It has many countries in one country, the diversity. I come from eastern part of India, a state called Bengal. And I remember in 2013, when you came to Bengal, there's a road called Kamak Street in Kolkata. You got down from the car and had vada from a street side vendor.
That's right. It was, I think, in Kamak Street. I was on my way to see the Chief Minister, and I wanted to experience the Indian street food. And so I think it was called Victoria Vada, and the seller was named their stall after Queen Victoria.
Yeah.
But I remember it, and apparently the 30 rupees I spent, they've kept that money as a souvenir.
Yeah. So you took out 30 rupees and gave it to him.
I did, that's right.
Brilliant. You know, when you talk about India, obviously you have a special space in Indians' mind. One of the incidences which remain there in our memory as a sore point, that Jallianwala Bagh incidents. And we were thoroughly pleased and touched when you, as the first British Prime Minister, openly apologized for it. When did actually it occur to you that maybe the Brits owe an apology to Indians for that incident?
Well, I think it's something we've all grown up knowing about, not least because of the way that it's been explained to generations like mine in films and television. I think I would put a particular credit with the Indian diaspora community in the United Kingdom, who explained to me how much it's still an issue, and how it needed to be addressed. And it was a great honor as a British Prime Minister to go to Amritsar and to see the beauties of the temple.
Absolutely.
And the incredibly, this extraordinary, tranquil and wonderful place. And I was very keen that the Britain-India relationship needs to be a relationship about the future, about our people now, our challenges today. And in order to do that, sometimes there are things in our past we have to confront and talk about and acknowledge. And I think that's what I was trying to do.
Absolutely. You know why it stood out? Because, people make mistakes, nations make mistakes, but it only requires a big heart to actually spell out the mistakes and acknowledge and own up the mistakes and say sorry. So that's why I think you stand out there completely. And, in your memoir, you talked about that with India, the kind of partnership that you would like to forge, or the Britain should forge with India, is about modern partnership not tinged with colonial guilt.
Well, I think that's right, because look, of course, we shouldn't deny our past and we shouldn't acknowledge the things that happened, both good and bad. We should be frank about that. But I think it would be a pity if the relationship between these two great countries was held back. And that's because there are so many things we need to deal with in the future. I mean, if you look at the world today, there are some huge challenges. How do we grow prosperous economies? How do we make sure we tackle the challenge of climate change? And as the world's oldest democracy and as the world's biggest democracy, how do we make sure that our democracies prevail and they succeed in a world where there is autocracy and challenges from people who don't have our values? And so it seems to me this is a thoroughly modern partnership with great interest for both. And we shouldn't be held back by the past. We need to not forget about it, but focus on the things for the future.
Yeah,
and that's what my premiership with respect to India, I think, was all about.
I believe the role that past should play in all our lives is that you take the lesson from it and make the corrections for future. So that's what the past should come for any use. But I think one of the things, if one small thing can be done, I think it will help us forget the past quicker. On a lighter side, that if you return the Kohinoor.
Well, that's not something I'm getting into today, particularly with everything that's been happening back in the UK. But look, there'll always be issues of the past that will come up.
Always be. Memories always stays. But one should not spend or dwell much on the memory.
I mean, one of the things I found was that the Indian diaspora in Britain were an enormous spur to making this relationship work, because there are so many people in India who are making of Indian origin, are making an extraordinary contribution to the British economy and British society. But they also have these great links back to India. And I think making the most of that, we'd be crazy not to make the most of that.
Yes. In fact, I was scanning through your video, the Wembley speech, I think in 2015. Yeah. You spoke very highly of Indians, and the values that you spoke about, if I could remember it correctly, you talked about responsibility, family, enterprise, and hard work. And you assigned these values to the Indian diaspora, the British Indians who are there.
I mean, they make a huge contribution. I mean, there are 1.6 million people of Indian origin in Britain. It felt like most of them were in Wembley that night with Prime Minister Modi.
Yeah,
I mean, normally in Britain, we are lucky if we speak to an audience of 500, 1,000 people. And there in Wembley Stadium was 60,000 people.
Yeah.
It's quite a different thing. It was an extraordinary event, and I was very proud to do that with Prime Minister Modi.
Your delegations in India, I think you got a plane full of people, politicians, bureaucrats, top leaders, and a couple of Olympic legends too.
That's right. I think Steve Redgrave came, and Kelly Holmes.
Yeah.
I think at the time we were looking forward to the next Commonwealth Games, which were being held in India. We'd had this great success with the Olympic Games, and I think these events can be transformational for a country. But I think it shows the partnership between Britain and India is not just about politics, not just about issues. It's also about business, about enterprise, about the environment, and about sport and culture too. So
yes, absolutely,
and about cricket as well.
From that delegation, such a huge delegation you went around. Do you look back and try and remember that any one or two milestones from that time, which has been taken up and been consistently driven down?
I think the green tech area, I think this idea that we should be working together to tackle climate change. And if I look at things like the International Solar Alliance, Britain, under my leadership, we grew the economy, but we cut our carbon emissions. We invested in offshore wind, onshore wind, solar. And I think bringing that expertise and sharing it with you and making a partnership on those things. I mean, I'm looking now at what's happening in India and the massive investment in green technology. I think that has been incredibly positive. We obviously now have this negotiation over a British-India trade agreement, which we want to see happen. There's a fast timetable for it of this autumn. I hope that comes off. And I hope it isn't just about goods, the trade in goods. We're both great services economies.
Yeah.
And we want to see good agreements in insurance and banking and retail and other services, because I think, we're going to benefit from freer and more open trade.
So the legacy has been kept alive.
I think so. I think that
yes, I think
my successor prime ministers have all been very keen on this Britain-India partnership. So I think it is very hardwired into our system. And I think it's there because it's in both our interests and because there are so many people cheering us on as we do it.
Absolutely. It has to be in both our interests, otherwise it doesn't have a long life. Come back to one of our neighbors, where I think we will have some more convergence of minds. It's about China. I mean, you wrote about China, that a more democratic path for China is inherently desirable. And then you also said that no longer you believe that it's inevitable.
I don't believe it's inevitable. I believe it's desirable, but we have to deal with the world as it is, not the world as we would wish it to be. I don't regret in any way wanting to have good economic links with China. And I also think it's right that we should be thinking, whether that's India or Britain, we should be thinking, how do we try and make sure that the re-emergence of China as one of the world's great powers and great economies, which I think is inevitable, how do we try and make that rise safe? That is the great challenge for it. But I think what I wrote in my book was to say that there's no doubt that trade and investment can help change happen. It doesn't make them inevitable, but it's still desirable to take that path. Better that than to cut countries off and to pretend that you can't have a relationship.
But the rogue that China is today, do you think it's, to some extent, Western world is responsible for the way it dealt with China post-World War II?
I think that, look, all countries have to be held responsible for their own actions. And I think the Chinese have to account for the fact that they have become, more aggressive diplomatically. So it's for them to explain. I don't think you can blame that on the Western desire to try and help China with openness to trade and to investment and to membership of the WTO. These were things that I think were important for China, important for lifting hundreds of millions of people out of poverty in China. But we have to find a way. We need a relationship, a modern relationship now, where we say, right, we clearly have challenges here. Where do we cooperate, like on climate change? Where are we in competition? And where do we have real disagreements? And let's try and manage those disagreements to make sure that we can do that safely.
Of course, I think the expectation of the West was that, like the way France, England, post-World War II, they gained prominence, and that happened through trade and business. I think it was an expectation that there will be a democratization of China if you have a healthy trade relationship with them.
It's always said that the Germans particularly had this expression of change through trade. We never spoke about it in quite that way. And the way I would put it is you're unlikely to get change with no trade. It definitely helps to having that exchange of people and information and ideas and business and investment. In many cases, that is positive, but it does not make change inevitable. And we have never been naive. We've always known the Chinese Communist Party runs China. It has totally different values to India or to Britain, where we believe in democracy, the rule of law, we believe in rights. We have a different approach. But we tried, and we should continue to try, to have a relationship. Say, look, we are not going to agree over these fundamentals, but we have to try and build a relationship where we respect each other's differences, but try to make a safe world for the future.
Yeah, absolutely. We have to keep trying. The recent development, I think you would have come across that now Xi Jinping, he's brought in changes in the constitution, and special military operations abroad, he has legalized it. I think all of us, the rest of the world, will have to think about it and keep an eye on that.
This is one of these areas where we're not going to agree. We're very clear that sea lanes must be kept open. There's a right of navigation through these areas, and it is a disagreement. But let's try and find a way of keeping our guard up and not in any way backing down, but also discussing with the Chinese areas where there are disagreements and concerns.
You know, there's a saying in Hindi which says that for living, you need food, clothing, and shelter. These are the three basic things that you need. But these days, Indians have started realizing that you need the fourth thing, which is data or technology, whichever way you put it. You know, we feel that the Indian way of being is peaceful. I mean, we've defended ourselves always. We have never gone and invaded anybody else. So India's rise in the global high table is that peaceful way. So do you think that's the right way in the modern time, and that's the way forward for the rest of the world?
I very much respect that part of Indian culture. I think is important. I think it's right that India takes its place at the top table. We should definitely have that United Nations reform where India becomes a permanent member of the Security Council. But that reform is difficult to get through for all the reasons you're aware of. I hope that as India takes this more important international role, that yes, of course, maintain the commitment to peaceful development. But I think it's also important to be clear that we need a world of strong institutions and a world of strong rules. And while non-alignment has been very important in India's history, and I'm sure is important in the future, that's not the same as saying rules don't matter. And obviously we've had this appalling situation with Russia invading Ukraine, and it's not a on the one hand, on the other hand situation. It is a situation of absolute clarity where one country has taken the most aggressive, the most destructive, the most illegal approach, and is literally pounding this country and its people and killing thousands and destroying property and everything else. And it's not just bad for Ukraine. It's not just bad for the international order of rules. It is also bad for the world.
Putin has a history of being such unpredictable. I've heard you mentioning about how Europe's response was, you called it feeble, to his
Well, I think
Georgia.
in 2008, when he did this with Georgia, of taking, using local groups to take parts of Georgia. The Western response was feeble. There were no proper sanctions. There were no proper consequences. When he did the same with Ukraine in 2014, there were consequences, there were sanctions. We can certainly argue more should have been done, but at least some lessons were learned from 2008. But you see now that even that wasn't enough, that we have an even more aggressive Putin. And my point is that we need the whole world to condemn what has happened and to say this is a breach in the rules, because otherwise we're going to end up in a lawless and much more dangerous world.
Our foreign minister has said that Europe's problem is not India's problem.
Well, I think I mean, sorry to interrupt, but it's everybody's problem. This global increase in food prices is going to affect every country in the world.
Problem.
And that is a direct effect of Putin's action, because Ukraine is one of the breadbaskets of the world. I was in Egypt recently, a huge importer of Ukrainian wheat and grains. Yeah. And the effect across African countries and elsewhere is going to be dreadful because of what has happened. So we live in a world where a local problem is a global problem, and this is definitely a global problem.
Could it have been prevented by any way, or because it's Putin,
well, I think
the senses don't prevail?
I think we have to be clear about who is responsible, and it is Putin. He chose, and the West, I think, effectively used intelligence well before the invasion of publicizing exactly what it was that Putin was planning to do. So he couldn't cover it up. He couldn't pretend that it was provoked. He couldn't pretend that there was some justification. It was done in plain sight. And I think that we have to recognize there is only one person to blame for this, and that is Vladimir Putin.
context of UK, even in the context of Brexit, why do you think that the future of multinational institutions like UN, NATO, WHO, what do you think their role is going to be? Are they going to be more or less relevant?
I think they're going to be very relevant, but I think they vary in how well they're responding to the challenges of the age. I think if we take the terrible pandemic that we've had, there clearly were failings in the WHO. Now, some of those are being addressed, but if you ask me honestly, I would say for the future, yes, we should do our best to reform the WHO, but there might be things we need to do as well that we can do faster. We need to have better early warning systems about future pandemics. And I think that's something we can probably do alongside the WHO. That's something countries can come together and do, because if we try to do everything by reforming the WHO, I feel we'll be sitting around and discussing that reform and not actually getting what's done.
As far as WHO is concerned, as far as I remember, during this COVID pandemic time, I always got a feeling that they themselves don't know. And yet they were coming up with directions, guidance from time to time, and often self-contradicting themselves. Like, I think I read somewhere in the beginning, they said, don't wear masks.
Yeah.
Then they said, mask is mandatory. So in the WHO context or any other context, I personally feel that you may not need to know everything, right? No institution, but it's most risky when you don't know, yet you try and be convincing as somebody who knows. That's where WHO needs some intervention.
Well, I think they did what they could in very difficult circumstances, but we can definitely now look at what happened and learn from the weaknesses. And I would argue one of the key weaknesses is that we need to make sure we are sequencing the genomes of these emerging viruses and pathogens much more quickly and sharing that information much more rapidly. And I think there are examples of institutions like the Global Alliance on Vaccines and Immunization, Gavi, which have grown up outside the formal structures of the UN and the WHO. And I think we could have some organization like that for pandemic preparedness, where scientific institutions in every country around the world are doing this research, are sharing that information, so we know what's coming faster and take it out of politics. We have to keep these things, the science needs to be transparent, needs to be clearly shared, and we don't want to get bound up in organizations being embarrassed. They don't want to embarrass the Chinese, or they don't want to embarrass the Africans, or they don't want to embarrass the British. We don't need that. We just need the information. We need it in the most timely manner possible. And when I was Prime Minister, we had the Ebola epidemic in Africa. And again, on that occasion, the WHO was too slow. And so I think we've had two examples of where we need to have a non-political organization, science-based, shared between countries, telling us the latest information.
So will that happen under the gamut of WHO if you have to decide, or do you think there are independent bodies should come up with bilateral relationship, or maybe a collection of countries should come up with something which is, when you don't know things, you need to exchange your notes. Nobody knows.
Yes, exactly. I hope that the G20 can give this impetus. They've discussed it, but it needs to be followed through. I think you can combine it with the new pandemic treaty, the global health treaty that's been discussed, which can address some other issues. But I think really what's important is having this institution in place so that pathogens are being sequenced, everyone's getting the information, and we react faster in future. Because I think one of the failings in the past was countries were too embarrassed to tell the WHO about bad things that were happening, and the WHO was too embarrassed to tell the rest of the world about what was happening because they didn't want to upset certain people. And so you get a delay in the system, a bureaucracy in the system, which we don't need.
The first part is, justifiable. I mean, if something is going wrong, we didn't get to know about the COVID thing in China till the time it broke out of proportion.
That's my point. And the same with Ebola in West Africa, where there was a sense of the countries didn't want to admit to problems fast enough. But if you have an independent organization with Centers for Disease Control and scientific organizations in every country in the world sharing in real time that data and making sure the rich countries are helping the poorer countries to have the technology they need for genome sequencing and everything else, that I think could make the world safer. So sometimes these institutions are capable of reform. I think NATO as an organization is actually performing well, particularly with the challenge that has come from Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Some organizations we should try to improve, but we should recognize we may need to go above and beyond.
Coming to talk about some making change happen. You are active, very much active on your philanthropical side. I mean, and climate change is something that's on your radar, right? That's something which is of keen focus for you.
That's right. So one of the things I did back in 2005 when I became leader of the Conservative Party was to say, all over the world, there are Conservative parties that are rather behind on climate change. I wanted in Britain us to be leaders on climate change. And I said we wanted to lead one of the greenest governments ever. And I think we did. We saw a massive increase in offshore wind power. Britain became the biggest offshore wind power in the world. We grew the economy. We cut our carbon emissions. We set up the world's first green investment bank. Huge investment in solar. Reinvestment in nuclear energy, which of course is carbon-free. So I maintain my interest in this. I've just been in Australia talking with our sister party about the challenges they face there. And obviously it's great to be here in India where you're taking such huge strides with the investment in green energy. And I think there's a particular point here, which is countries like Britain and India should be doing more to help the poor countries, the vulnerable countries, where traditional investment in electricity generation is probably better done via decentralized energy, green energy, local grids that connect solar to batteries to help people with their local electricity, rather than thinking this is about big infrastructure projects. So I think there's a real opportunity for us to take to actually help switch on a lot of countries to both electricity and energy.
Every year, I'm told that I think for about 100 years, measurement of temperature, atmospheric temperature is possible. And almost every year, the world has seen the hottest year. So it's only increasing and there's no stopping of it. Back in India, there's a Shimla, a city there up in the hills. During this British time, that used to be the summer capital. Right now. So summer capital has seen Loo, which is heat wave this time for the first time. So but it pains me or it worries me when I tend to see that there are murmurs going around about politicizing such missions also. I mean, if you talk about Greta Thunberg or groups like Extinction Rebellion, do you see that there is...
I think they play an important role in one regard, which is they raise the public consciousness about the importance of the environment. But they sometimes use tactics, which I think are very off-putting to lots of people. They are stopping the traffic, they're stopping people getting to work, they're stopping the country from operating properly. So I think that is a mistake. And I think the other thing is there sometimes is a sort of absolutism in the green movement. I mean, until we have full green energy, we are going to need to use fuels like gas. And it makes sense to, if you have gas in the North Sea off the coast of the United Kingdom, it makes sense to extract the last gas rather than import it from countries that are far away. It's actually less carbon intensive. And yet some in the green movement refuse to accept there should be any more extraction of gas or oil, even if it's less carbon intensive to extract it in your own country rather than import it from elsewhere. So that would be a disagreement I have with the green movement. Is
it because of ignorance, over-enthusiasm, or political? Obviously, we live for recency. I mean, if I don't have food to eat, I'm not going to think about saving energy. First, I would like to feed myself, and then I'll think about saving energy. There has to be a balance, like everything else in life. Sensitivity, being conscious about this climate change, green energy, that is needed at the very last, till the very grassroots level. But why do they do it? Why do they take it to that extent?
I think because if you're running a green movement, your arguments are about going green, doing everything now. They're not having to govern the country. They're not having to make decisions.
Absolutely.
And my point is that governments do have to make those decisions. They've got to keep the lights on. They've got to make sure there's enough energy to power your economy. Now, of course, we want that to be green energy. And in Britain, we've done a huge amount to make that green energy. But I think you have to have some realism and some recognition that actually if you are extracting gas from the North Sea rather than importing it from thousands of miles away, that is actually better for the climate than just importing more gas. So you have to temper these things with realism. You have to explain to people why that is fundamentally the right approach and also a green approach. And sometimes it's frustrating that some of those organizations don't understand that point or don't want to understand.
Yeah, right. Did you ever have any opportunity to have a discussion with them across the table and trying to put across that?
I had a very good relationship. Greta Thunberg wasn't around so much when I was Prime Minister, but I had a good relationship with Greenpeace and Friends of the Earth and Wildlife Fund and others.
How did they react when you tell them that?
Well, we had a good dialogue. They always wanted you to do more, but when it came to things like encouraging insulation, the green energies, what we were doing in terms of Green Investment Bank and the progress we were making on climate, they were supportive of the good things we did. I think it's important if you're talking to governments about an issue like that, you have to try and encourage. And I think sometimes with Extinction Rebellion, you feel there's nothing a government can do. I mean, in Britain today, our carbon emissions are not lower than 1984. They're lower than 1894. And I'm not saying we've still got more to do. There's plenty more to do. But you've got to try and encourage governments down the right path. If all they get is criticism, you lose the centre ground of British politics. And also, it's harder for politicians to keep going and do the right things.
Absolutely. I quote you again. You said, the pragmatic and practical path is often the hardest to take. Why did you say that?
Well, because governing is about choosing, and often in politics, there's no good choice. There's just some choices from very bad to not quite so bad, and you have to be practical and sensible and try to take the right path. And so you have to temper your idealism with pragmatism, and the pragmatic path is often hard. And I think in the world we've seen recently with populist politicians like Donald Trump pretending that all these decisions are easy and there's some simple solution that only if these idiot politicians hadn't thought of, if only we hadn't built a wall all the way across the southern states of America, then the problems of immigration would be solved. They pick simple ideas to complicated problems and use that as a way of inflaming popular opinion. But it doesn't actually solve the problem. Yes. Solving the problem is often difficult and hard work and pragmatic and needs reasonableness and common sense. And I'm very keen that we don't lose those things in the world we live in today.
There's a philosophy that I live by, which I say, especially in the work domain, that to be ordinary is extraordinary. I think somewhere people try too hard on simple things, on simple understanding, and then they go all over. I mean, they lose directions. Are we saying the same thing?
I think it sounds a very similar philosophy. I think the trouble with politics often is that a simple lie beats a complicated truth.
Yeah.
But you have to work for the complicated truth. And also in politics, people always want a simple, black and white, yes or no answer. And in so many things, the answer is not quite black or white, not quite yes or no. It's, well, we need to take these difficult, practical steps. But if we do all of them, we'll get to the right place. And this is the challenge of politics, is you have to never stop explaining what you're trying to do and recognizing that just simple sound bites and simple answers aren't necessarily going to do it.
Black and white, I mean, yours truly is one of the victims, having not any gray area in my understanding and philosophy and logic. I try to live by black and white. It's very difficult, let me tell you. Thank you very much, Dave. Great having you on Duologue with me. I'm sure that India and UK would work towards this climate change issues together, and we would be able to make more inroads in common goals and working together in the fields of business, economy, media and entertainment, where I come from. And
I think we face the same challenges. How do we make sure the biggest democracy and the oldest democracy, how do we maintain faith in our democracy? How do we lift our countries in terms of prosperity and good jobs for our people? And how do we tackle this huge problem of climate change? And Britain and India, I think, can have a great partnership, and I hope I can play my role in that.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. We need more politicians. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks, Doctor. Thank you.